welcome to the deep dive. You sent us a really fascinating piece, and yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. Dive deep, pull out the most interesting, important bits. Think of it as like your fast track to getting up to speed without feeling like you're drowning in details.
Exactly. So today we're looking at this blog post from Media Mania, came out in March. And the author, they're talking from their own experience, right?
Yeah.
As a male gamer, sharing their, personal take on choosing male or female protagonists in games. It's a common thing players think about.
Precisely. So our mission here is pretty straightforward. We want to really get where this author is coming from, explore the nuances they bring up, and just give you a clear, kind of insightful rundown of their view on this choice. It can get pretty debated.
Okay, so the author kind of jumps right in, don't they? Straight into acknowledging how much talk there is around this. Sometimes, yeah, pretty intense talk online just about picking a male or female character. Seems simple, but yeah, and what's interesting right away is how they talk about the heat of those discussions. They mention forums where, opinions get really strong, people reacting quite negatively, apparently, just because someone chose to play as the opposite gender.
Wow.
It does make you wonder, why such strong feelings about a game choice, something meant for fun?
It really does. It's almost like some people think there's a right or wrong way to play. But what I found interesting was the author's own reflection. They said, at first, they didn't think much about it, just usually picked a male character, same as their own gender.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing all these different opinions made them, really think about why they made that choice.
And that thinking, that sort of self-analysis, leads them to their main conclusion, which is, a pretty definite preference for playing games as male protagonist.
Right. And the core reason they give, it seems to boil down to this feeling that the game world itself, and specifically the relationships with other characters, especially female ones, it just feels more, appealing, relatable. When you're seeing it through a male character's perspective, it's about that social dynamic, it seems.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This idea of perspective. The author feels like playing as a male character just lines up better with how they see things, how they'd interact in that world, and that alignment, that boosts the immersion for them.
Immersion, exactly.
They even talk about a slight disconnect, like something's just a little off when they play as a female character. Really makes you think about how much our own identity kind of shapes these virtual experiences we have.
Yeah, that feeling of being sort of on the same wavelength, even if you're not literally self-inserting, And for this author, it really sounds like the relationships in the game are super important for their enjoyment.
Right.
Not just like romance options, but all the interactions with NPCs. And they just prefer navigating those interactions as a male character.
Absolutely. And they even specifically call out liking bromance.
Right.
Those, strong friendships between male characters, non-romantic ones. They see that as a really compelling part of games where you play as a guy. So it suggests the types of relationships a game emphasizes can really sway player preference.
Yeah. So generally speaking, male protagonists win out for this author. But they do mention exceptions, which is interesting. Certain games where they actually feel a female character is like a better fit.
Exactly right. They lay out a few specific things they look for in those cases. Games without a lot of violence is one. Also, games where the story and dialogue don't really change much depending on the gender you pick.
Okay.
And games with an overall aesthetic that's, cute or visually feminine, where a female character just feels more natural to them.
And the big example they use is Pokemon, right?
Yep.
Which makes sense. Generally not super violent. And the main story, the journey, is pretty much the same whether you're a boy or girl trainer.
And this brings up something else they mentioned explicitly, a personal sort of discomfort, maybe? Seeing female characters involved in game violence.
Oh, interesting.
Which gives you a bit more insight into their personal values and how that influences what they enjoy playing.
It does. And they also pointed out if the protagonist doesn't speak, then the gender choice doesn't feel as significant.
Right.
Because the choices you make aren't changing the dialogue based on sex. The character is more just like an avatar you move around.
Yeah, good point. And they also expand on that idea of certain game worlds just feeling more suitable for a female protagonist. They used Pokemon Sword and Shield as an example there. And they noted those games often have that CEO A rating in Japan, basically, for all ages, usually implying less intense content, less violence.
So the whole vibe, the tone and style of the game world, that seems pretty important for these exceptions they make.
It seems like it, yeah.
So, bottom line for this gamer, it sounds like those cases where a game fits their preferences and feels right for a female protagonist. They're saying that's pretty rare for them.
That's what they state, yeah. Finding that specific combination is uncommon in their experience. Okay, but now we get to what the author themselves calls their maybe extreme view.
The twist.
Yeah, a preference for games that actually have fixed protagonists, meaning you don't get to choose gender or, other core things. The character is just set.
Okay, wait. So after all that thinking about male versus female choices, they actually prefer no choice. What's the logic there?
Well, the argument they make is, okay, customizable characters give you player agency, sure.
Right.
But they argue it can actually weaken the story sometimes. It makes it harder to build a really strong, consistent perspective from that character.
Ah, I see. So they're saying to get a character with real depth, solid backstory, thematic weight, you kind of need that character to be clearly defined from the start. And if gender is just another toggle, it can, dilute what makes that character unique.
That's pretty much it. They think it dilutes the individuality. And they give some strong examples like Kratos from God of War.
Oh, yeah.
Or the characters in Life is Strange. They argue if you changed core things about them, like their gender, it would completely change the story, right?
Fundamentally, yeah.
The impact wouldn't be the same. It really makes you consider how tied a character's specific identity can be to the actual narrative being told.
So from their perspective, for games aiming for that really powerful cinematic kind of storytelling,
right,
a fixed protagonist is often just more effective.
That's the conclusion they reach. More effective for delivering those impactful narratives. They do contrast this, though. They say for RPGs like, say, Skyrim, where it's all about player freedom and making your own story.
Right, the sandbox approach.
Exactly. Or maybe action games that aren't super focused on a deep plot. In those cases, yeah, gender selection makes more sense to the author. It's more appropriate there.
Okay. And then they wrap things up with a couple of final thoughts.
Yeah, a few interesting closing points.
One is this idea that, hey, the fact we even have these debates online, sometimes passionate ones, about game characters, it's actually maybe a sign that things are relatively peaceful, that we have the luxury for these kinds of discussions.
It's a thought-provoking frame, isn't it?
It is.
Like, when basic needs are covered, we can afford to get really into the weeds about our entertainment. And the author also just says they personally enjoyed thinking it all through, analyzing their own stance.
Yeah, just the process itself. And they end on a lighter note, which I liked.
Me too.
Basically saying, look, don't overthink it too much. If you choose a character just because they look cool or you find them attractive, that's totally fine.
Absolutely.
It's your game, your experience. It brings it back to that very personal level of playing games.
So, yeah, summing up this author's view after their own deep dive, primarily they lean towards male protagonists. Feels more immersive, better connection with the relationships for them. But there are exceptions. Female characters feel right in games that are less violent, maybe have that cute aesthetic where gender doesn't heavily impact the story.
Right.
And then overarching that is this belief that actually, for really strong story-driven games, fixed protagonists often work better.
Okay. And hopefully that gives you, our listener, a really clear, concise snapshot of how this one gamer thought through this whole topic. A quick, but we hope pretty thorough look at their perspective from this Media Mania blog post.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Thinking about the author's last point about simple reasons like looking cool being valid. What are your main drivers when you choose a protagonist? Do you find yourself nodding along with some of the author's points we discussed today? Or do totally different things factor into your decision? Something to maybe reflect on next time you boot up a game with character select?